Hello and welcome to another edition of Hometown Histories. I'm Dallas Grove. Today we'll meet a woman whose story may bring back memories for you if you've ever been to a Peterson's restaurant. Welcome to Bess Apostolou Peterson. Bess, thank you so much for being here. We've talked on the phone so many times, and the first thing that you said as we spoke to me was, "It's been a beautiful life." And I thought that was what a wonderful thing. I mean, you hadn't told me much about your life at that point, but there you had summed it up. And that was in our very first discussion.
I'm truly blessed. I really feel that. I am truly blessed. I've had a wonderful life. I have wonderful friends. I have a wonderful family. And I am truly blessed. And I'm glad to be here.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, at 91 years old, you were born in 1924. And you share something with Marge Edelson of the board of the museum. Mm-hmm. And one is a hairdresser.
We meet every day, every Thursday. Every Thursday.
And the other things that you share are that you both were brought up in Asbury Park, a few years apart, but you had some of the same experiences. Yes. A decade or 2 decades would.
I don't know Marge's age.
That's because she's timeless, as are you.
Yes, totally. Yes.
But she looks forward to meeting you all those times. And in doing that, she actually engaged you in joining the museum here.
Yes.
You were in a neighborhood that was very diverse, but you say very compatible. Tell us about that.
Yes. It was these are all the immigrants that had come over, and we were first generation. So you had the Greeks, you had the Jews, you had the Irish, you had the blacks, you had the Polish, you had the Italians. It was a mixture. It really was a mixture. And we were the first generation. And it was just a wonderful life. Everything was open porches. The men went off to work, the fathers. But the mothers didn't speak a word of English. They were
so hard to know each other then.
They didn't. They just greeted it. Everything was open porches, then wraparound porches. Everybody was out watching their children. We were all out playing together.
So the children brought the neighborhood together.
Oh, I guess so. And the mothers too, because they would be on the porch in the afternoons while we were out there playing. But it was wonderful. And as the years went by, of course, the women would pick up a few English words. Good day, good afternoon, goodbye. But they were all our mothers. They watched over us. And regardless of whether it was Mrs. Wygody or whether it was Mrs. Goldberg or whoever it was, or Mrs. My Aunt Mrs. Kisses or the other woman up the street, the Aronis up the street. It didn't make any difference. They all watched out for us.
It takes a village, huh?
It certainly did. It really did.
You said it was the perfect place to grow up.
It was a wonderful place to grow up. It was so diverse, and we respected one another, whether you were white, black, or whatever.
Yeah.
We were there playing together all the time, and it was wonderful. Really, looking back, how fortunate we are, and especially in today's time, with all these problems coming up, that we didn't have that at all. We didn't have that at all. It was just a wonderful time growing up, and everyone watched out for each other. And we were out there playing from morning to night when we weren't in school.
What did you do after school?
After school. Well, after school, again, my parents were Greek, from Greece. We had to speak Greek at home. And in fact, when we went off to school, none of us spoke English until we went into kindergarten. In less than 2 weeks, we learned to speak English. But we had to go to Greek school in the afternoon. Those years, American school was, you had split sections, not split sections. You'd come home for lunch.
Yes.
Because it was a neighborhood school. It was Bangs Avenue.
Bangs Avenue.
And it was a neighborhood school. So you'd come home for lunch and you went back again. And then you got home at 3:15. And it was such a ritual, looking back at it now, that the Greek kids took their Greek school books and we were allotted a room in Bond Street School. And that's where we had Greek lessons. So it was from 4 to 6, Monday through Friday. the Jewish children took their Hebrew books and went off to Hebrew school, which was way up on, almost on Fifth Avenue. The Catholic children, Italian children, and the Catholics, they took their catechism book and went to Mount Carmel, which at that time was the original church on the corner of Banks Avenue and Prospect.
What do you know?
Yes,
Yeah.
and so we all went our separate ways, but at that time after school. But of course, on Saturdays and Sundays, we were always together. And summertime was always outdoors. You were outdoors all the time.
And one of the people you were outdoors with was a good friend, May Strano.
Yes.
Yes.
May,
When did you meet her?
I met May when we were in high school. Because we were on the west side, she was on the east side. So by that time, we had moved from the west side and we had moved over to the east side. And we were on Summerfield Avenue. And they were going into high school then. You had to walk. There were no school buses. There were no school buses. So there was a family, brother and sister, that lived on what's the name of that? Lake Avenue, on Wesley Lake there. And they would come up on Bond Street, and whoever was coming, we would meet on Bond Street, all the people from the west side, the students from the west side. By the time we got to Asbury Park High School, by the time we got to Fifth Avenue, there'd be an army of us walking. Not on Main Street, but on Bond Street. And not only that, but the Asbury Park High School was a receiving district from all these neighboring towns. So there was a train coming in.
Including Ocean Township, right?
Yes.
Yes.
But we didn't meet the Ocean Township because they came from the north. We were meeting the train at the train station, and at that time it was still open, Fifth Avenue. The train would come in, and with students from Seagirt, Spring Lake, Belmar, that whole area, and they would come. So can you imagine now? All of us are students walking and waiting for that train to come and getting those students off and marching into school. There were no school buses those years.
Yeah.
And so, anyway, it was a wonderful time of growing up. You asked me about May.
Yes, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I get carried away. May and I became very good friends from that time on, and very good friends.
And she was the sister of Pat Strano.
Pat Strano.
Who was in construction here in Ocean.
Yes.
This intrigues me because of my love for horses, but these are horses in Asbury Park, and I see children on them. What is that about?
Growing up in Asbury Park, it's so different. At the far end of the beachfront, where the Marine Grill used to be, which now I believe is the Asbury Towers.
Oh, right.
Okay.
So, yes.
That whole stretch there, that was sand. And there was when we were growing up, my father would take us there. If we behaved, we would walk to the end. And if we behaved, there were ponies there, right on the sand. And we would have pony rides.
That's fantastic.
And that was great. And after I married, I continued that with my children. And on Sundays, we would go after church, and we would always be down on the beachfront, with weather permitting.
Then you went through high school, and we have a wonderful high school picture of you here. And there's also another one in the book that you brought. You're a good-looking woman.
He did wonders. Ed Newmare did wonders.
No, I think he had a lot to work with there. So that's a wonderful picture. One of the other things is that you remember from those days the bridge that went from the Berkeley Carteret across the street, a walkway.
Over Ocean Avenue. From the second floor, I don't know whether it was, no, it wasn't the second floor, it had to be way above the street. From the Berkeley Carteret, there was a brick building, and it was a brick bridge, and it crossed over into the pavilion, which was on, is that 5th, 6th, what is that, 8th Avenue? The pavilion caught fire.
I see.
And they had to break that down, yes. That was terrible. So,
some of your other memories from high school are that Asbury Park High School was represented at the World's Fair in 1939. Tell us about that.
I was a freshman in high school at the time, and they wanted, Asbury Park was being represented, and the theme was Tulip Time. And we were dressed with as Dutch girls and with the wooden clogs, and we had to dance to, and we
Tiptoeing.
tiptoeing
Yes.
through the tulips,
Uh-huh.
and it was great. It was great.
It came off all right.
It came off fine.
Oh, great.
Lorraine Woodruff was our was the vocalist, and she sang while we were dancing, and it was a wonderful experience.
And you were just a freshman then.
I was a freshman then. I was so a so-called hick from a little town in New Jersey, representing the shore.
Yes,
Representing the shore.
Yeah,
And, we were told that. We had to be very careful and remember that we were representing Asbury Park, and we were told, we were so
proud.
Young girls, and we were so proud about it. And
Yeah.
the fact that we were going to be dancing at the World's Fair
Yeah.
in New York.
That's fantastic.
That was fantastic. That really was great.
Something else you were doing while you were just young in high school was hostessing at one of the restaurants in Asbury Park. That was a big deal at 14 years old.
Yes, but just prior to that, on Deal Lake, there were these boat rides. And if you can see it through one of those...
Yeah, we have a picture of
Yes.
this one.
And you see those boat rides? You see
I
that?
do.
Okay.
Yes, the other boat.
They had the same thing on Deal Lake.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was a cashier there. And
Where? What was the name of it? Was it Criterion?
The owner of the Criterion owned that too.
I see.
So he had that concession on the lake. And so I had a register. It was this big. It was a wooden register. 5 cents, 10 cents, and 25 cents.
It's great.
And the rides were 15 cents.
Uh-huh.
So that was it. And it was a little cubbyhole that they had like a telephone booth.
Uh-huh.
And the owner was Mr. Courageous, who owned the Criterion restaurant.
Uh-huh.
And he was on that first pavilion down on Ocean Avenue.
Right.
And where Cookman Avenue comes into, Cookman Avenue comes, not Cookman, Asbury Avenue.
Asbury
And right
Avenue,
up.
yes. Uh-huh.
And that was the pavilion. And he had the Criterion restaurant along with the candy shop. And had one of his hostesses left or got sick or whatever. The next thing you know, I was told to go home, get dressed, put on nylons. And at this point, I had saddle shoes, and I was just a young girl. And wear a hairnet and go over to there and be there at 2:00 and be a hostess. Well, at that time, the Criterion restaurant was the restaurant on the beachfront. And he had professional waitresses that would go down in the wintertime, go down to Palm Beach, and in the summertime they would come up here. So there I walked in this little, I went home and I didn't have nylons, and good thing I had an older sister. So I raided her things. And I went there. And I walked in and they all looked at me. These are professional women. And they looked at me, what are you doing here? And I told them, I says, I was told to report here.
Now, who told you?
The young man who was in charge of the boat ride.
Oh, okay.
He received
He
a
just
telephone
picked you
call.
out and said you
No. The owner, Mr. Courageous, called and said he needed someone.
needed someone.
And the only thing he could think of was me, not knowing how old I was. I was always tall for my age. I always looked older than I was. And so I lied a lot. Because everybody worked on the beachfront. And
Right.
you had to have working papers to
Working,
work
I
there.
remember working papers.
Okay, you had to have working papers. Well, I got away with that. I lied and said I was older than I was. But the hostess, the main hostess there, she was sorry for me. She took pity on me. So she took me under her wing. And I was a hostess there all through high school, all on weekends. On weekends they needed, because their help would go away.
Yes.
And their seasons were very short those years. But we were there. The young people from Asbury Park, they held the fort down for all the concessionaires on the beachfront. It was a wonderful time.
So that was actually the start of your restaurant career.
I said to the Mrs. Courageous, I says, I don't know how you could stand this. I'll never marry a restaurant man. And she says, don't ever say never. You never know what's in store for you.
And you made that observation because they were working all the time.
Yes, you were working,
you're
yes.
dedicated. In fact, one time
Yes,
you said
they were
you're
working,
married to the business.
You're married to the business, and especially the concessionaires on the beachfront. You have such a short period of time to work. to make your living, you have to. There is no industry in Asbury at that time. There was no industry down the shore. The only industry was the beachfront, and these were concessionaires, and it was from Labor Day, from Memorial Day to Labor Day.
Right. All the fun time.
And the fun time. But you also have to remember, if the weekends were sunny, the local people would come out, and the people that had cars. You remember, this were Depression years too, and so the people that had cars, or the buses, the train, that train station was absolutely beautiful, and that was a sin when they knocked that down. So, but anyway, they would come in with trains. The trains would come down. The buses would come down.
So you graduated from high school and met your husband to be. That's some story. Tell us about how you met your husband, how that worked out.
Do I have to tell that? Well, anyway, my cousin was living with us. She was down from New England. It was Depression years that she came to live with us because all the factories up in New England had closed. And it was, as I said, it was Depression years. And she came down. She was the oldest girl. So she came down to work on the beachfront, and she stayed with us and stayed and worked at the Criterion in the candy department. And so she was there all year round, and weather permitting, it would be open. And so she lived with us. And anyway, so she went. She was on a blind date, and Frank came to pick her up, and I was there with my friend May, and we were talking about school and graduating, and we were going off to school, and I was going off to Boston, and we were just happy-go-lucky, girls, giggling and talking and whatnot. And anyway, so he rang the doorbell, and Pauline wouldn't come out. I said, Pauline, your date is here. And she wouldn't come out. Well, anyway, she finally came out. And I of course, asked, we asked him to come on in. I introduced myself, I introduced her to May. Turned out that he was my brother's best friend. I didn't know that.
You didn't know that?
Well, they were older,
Maybe that's how the date was set up.
Yes, it was a blind date for my brothers, yes. And anyway, it turned out that she wasn't his type. And
she wouldn't come out.
Well, she finally came out, they went out, they had a good time. And next thing you know, I was working at the beachfront on a weekend, and he came out, I was just leaving, and he said, Frank, what are you doing here? I said, Pauline just left. She's been waiting for your phone call. So he says, if you walk up the street, we weren't too far from there. We lived close by. I said, you'll be able to get her. She's been waiting for your call. So he left. He didn't say anything. And the following weekend, he was there again. I said, what are you doing here? So he says, I didn't come for Pauline, I came for you. I said, oh, no. I said, forget me. No. I said, I'm off to school. I'm graduating. I'm going to school. So anyway. When
you say you're off to school, you were going to go to college, right?
Yes,
you were going to.
I was going to be a phys ed teacher. That was my.
Well. And your father was very hopeful that that would be your path?
Yes. My father didn't like the idea that I was getting married that young. You're too young to get married. You should finish your school. But.
And you had Frank on the other side.
Well, his whole family, all his relatives, they would go. My father had the barber shop, and it was called Terry's Barber Shop, and they were all there and going into his barber shop, and thinking that he was the one that was against it, against Frank.
Yes.
And he said they were trying to convince my father, because I told Frank, no, I don't want to. No. But all the time my father was saying no, and when he knew what was going on, he said to me, what's going on? He says, you're too young, no. But anyway.
So you didn't go on to be a phys ed teacher?
No, I didn't go on to be a phys ed teacher.
You did marry Frank.
I did marry Frank. Had a wonderful marriage. We decided not to have children for a couple of years, and Frank was a very outgoing person. We were opposites, and you know what they say about opposites attract. I'm a chatterbug. I keep talking and with my hands and everything. And he was very, very serious, quiet very outgoing. He was a sports, but we did have in common. We had our religion in common. He was also Greek parents, and we also we were very sports-minded. He was an outdoors person, and we had that in common, and we had a wonderful. I was truly blessed to have been married to a man who gave me the independence that I had, and he was a very independent man. We were a good match, believe it or not.
And
even though there was 12 years difference in our age. Yeah.
So you found yourself then, not immediately, but very soon after you married, in the restaurant business for what, another...
Frank was involved when his brother had rented a place in Red Bank.
Now, there were brothers that were in the business?
No. Frank was... His older brother had a concession in Avon for a number of years.
I see.
But it was a summer concession. But as he got married, and he started having a family, and he realized he had to have an all year round business. Mm-hmm. So what he did then, he rented a place in Red Bank, homemade candies and ice cream. But when it was time to go open the season in Avon, he had no one to be in. So he said to Frank, he says, you have to stay there. And that's how Frank got into the business.
I see.
He had no intention of becoming but that's how he became involved in the business. And once he did get involved, he brought it up into a different level.
Yes.
And it was, yes.
That was before you got into the restaurant.
That's right, yes, way before we got into the restaurant.
So you were still a young woman when you were married. You were, what, about 19 years old?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes.
There's just one side shoot I want to take before we talk about some of those restaurants. You went to Ross Fenton Farm one night, which is a spectacular place that was in Ocean Township in the Wanamassa section. Celebrities came from all over, the highest grade talent, and you went there one night for dinner with him.
Well, we were newlyweds, and we were married in July. We were gone for a whole month, came back, and a couple, I won't mention their name because I don't know whether they want me to or not, but anyway, they're both deceased. They were Frank's very good friends, and that was the first couple that I was introduced to. And we became very good friends. And so he was involved in politics, this other couple. So he invited us to go out to dinner, not knowing where we were going. So we're in the car, and he's saying, he says, we're going to a place, but at that time, Wanamassa looked like the forest. Mm-hmm. It was nothing there. Uh-huh. And I remember...
It's on Deal Lake. Near Asbury Park, but in Ocean Township.
Yes.
Yes.
So, but it was right off of Sunset Avenue.
Right.
I had to make a left turn after you got off that on Sunset Avenue. I had to make a left turn, and I was awed by it all. I had no idea. We walked in and we looked like country pumpkins. Really, we walked in there. They were dressed to the nine. And I was fascinated because I had never seen anything like this. And I sat there. And of course, everyone looked at us. We didn't last very long.
You were underdressed.
We were underdressed. They had furs. This was something we had never seen. And gowns. And the men were in tuxes. Wow. It was all evening wear. And they were drinking and the music.
Do you remember gambling? Was there a gambling?
I don't remember. We didn't stay very long. No, we didn't stay very long. We were I think we knew we were at a place.
Yeah.
And I don't remember whether I had a drink or not. I don't remember. Be very honest with you.
But you were dazzled by the place.
I was dazzled by
the look of it, the people.
Look of the people, and yes.
An orchestra.
You have to remember, this is, coming from a small town like Asbury Park, we had never seen anything like this.
Yeah.
And so it was a new experience for me, but I was so awed by it all, really. And the women were dressed beautifully in their gowns and their hairdos and their makeup and their jewelry.
Yeah, did that influence Frank at all to get into the restaurant business, do you think?
Not at all.
No. It was intimidating.
No, he was a very plain person. He was an outdoors person, and he was not the typical restaurateur or the businessman. No, he wasn't. Give him golf clubs
Yeah.
and a horse. He loved to go horseback riding, ice skating. He was, he grew up down at the shore. And he did
It's
all that.
interesting, though, that the brothers all got into the restaurant business, and that there were many Petersons, and they were all named Petersons, right?
Well,
Yeah.
yes.
And people said that Peterson's this and
Well,
Peterson's that.
Well, that's because, I'm backtracking now. There was Petersons. The first Petersons was the Petersons in Avon. It was called Peterson's Pavilion. That was the only concession in Avon was that pavilion. My brother-in-law was there from Charlie, the oldest brother, was there from in the late 20s until he lost the lease in 1946, and he purchased a place in Spring Lake called Sunday Times, and that's where he moved to. But that was the only place that was called Peterson's. And when I married Frank, the place was called the Caramel Ice Cream Shop. It was not called Peterson's.
That was in Red Bank.
In Red Bank.
Yeah.
But he wanted to be his own landlord. And at that time, place opposite the Molly Picture was up for sale. And we bought that.
And that was
And then we put that
Peterson's Riverside.
Yes,
Right,
and that's
I
the first
remember
time
that.
Peterson's came up, Peterson's Riverside. And from there, as we went into business, we put every place we went to, it was Peterson's, whatever this place was.
Right.
So that's how it started. We started that. Frank and I started that.
And was there competition between the brothers?
No, there wasn't, because the younger brother had gone off. But meanwhile, war had been declared, and he was the youngest. The two brothers, Frank and Peter, lived with their mother, who was widowed. And so at that time, if you lived with your mother, if your mother was a widow, one of the boys had to stay home. That was a ruling then. And so they took the younger one, which was Peter. And so Peter went off to the service. Frank was 4F. And then I married Frank. And he was 4F at the time. Peter was off to the service. The other brother, George, was a chef in New York City with his wife. They worked for Schraff's.
Oh, Schraff's.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then when Schraff's, things were, the Depression came along, and he had to go out. They let him go. So they let him go, and his wife was a hostess there. So they came down to the shore and lived with my mother-in-law, and lived with her for a while. And George and his wife worked for the government. They took over a school. The Lakehurst had taken over a school in Lakewood, and it was the Pineland School for Boys, and they had taken it over during the World War II, and kept George and his wife on to and his children to cook and be there for the boys.
Yes.
And so it was. So he stayed there, and that's how he got it. He stayed there until Frank. I'm sorry, I'm saying what. Frank found this location that was up for sale in Lakewood, and he said, "Listen," he says, "it's a good deal." He says, "It's a wonderful restaurant. It's been there for a long time. It was called the Sunset Cabin, and a large piece of property came with it." And so so he said, "Why don't you?" He said, "You had that experience." He says, "I don't know anything about the restaurant business. He knew candies and ice cream." So he says, "Why don't you get interested in it?" He said, "If you're interested, we'll go in and buy it together." And that's what he did. And that's how it started.
Great.
That's how it started. Peterson's how it started. So.
Well, there were many others that people remember. They were going to Peterson's. They would say, "We're going to Peterson's." Everybody knew where they would be going to.
It was Peterson's Buttonwood Manor in Matawan, the PVI in
Pleasant Valley Inn.
Pleasant Valley
I
Inn.
love that place. That was in Colts Neck.
In Colts Neck. It was Colts Neck Inn came first. The first one was after Lakewood, the Petersons in Lakewood. It was called Peterson's Sunset Cabin. Frank built the Shrewsbury Inn.
Uh-huh.
He built, it was an old garage.
Oh, garage.
It was an old garage. And he found a liquor license was for sale, and he decided.
Okay.
So he decided he was going to do that. And everyone thought he was crazy, including me. We thought, what do you want there? What are you doing there? There's nothing there. But he found out that the Parkway was being built, and it was being built, and the exit would be Newman Springs Road, which led them right to the track. And
There you go. That was for the Shrewsbury?
Shrewsbury Inn.
Yes.
Okay? And because they were going to the Monmouth track, that was a direct route right to the track.
You said
And
he
of
had a
course-
lot of foresight. That was
And
one of the
tremendous-
things that,
that was it. That was a tremendous foresight. Opening up on opposite the Molly Pitcher,
yeah.
that was the only way to the shore was coming down on 35.
I remember that
And you
well.
crossed that bridge and you made the turn, and we were right there.
Right there.
Right there. And so
Basil Teas was ultimately
after
after years
when
and
it was
years
sold,
later.
yes.
Yeah.
After, when Frank passed away, it was sold,
Uh-huh.
and Basil Teas took it over.
Yeah.
And now I don't know what it's called now.
It's
something
at the
else.
brewery
Something
pub,
else,
I
right.
think. You were building an empire.
Yes, not realizing it.
Yes.
And this is what he
Just
was
taking
doing.
one opportunity, building on that, and the
And
next.
that Mrs. I forget the woman's name that owned the Buttonwood Manor, and it had been closed a number of years. And she had heard of Frank, and she called him, and her husband had passed away, and the place had been closed, and it was just, and he was very enterprising. He was a very quiet man, but he would go and ferret things out and find out everything there was to find out about it, and go about it, and do all his homework. And if he was satisfied with everything, he would start building or changing or whatever it was.
Right, right.
And this is
That's
the way
kind of
that
like
went.
marketing and finding out what
He
the
was exactly
competition
it.
in the
And
area
but he was a very private person.
Yeah.
No, I never knew anything. He'd say, sign this paper. And I said, what am I signing? Never mind, just sign the paper. And I knew that he was off on something, so he was.
So there you were midlife, would you say, or early? Still, you were a young woman.
Oh, I
were
was
you?
a young woman.
Yes,
I was a young
yes.
woman then, yes. And I was raising my children, our children, I should say, not my children, our children. I have to remember saying our children. And they were involved in their schoolwork, growing up with their Boy Scouts and Cub Scouts and Girl Scouts and involved very much in the church, in the Sunday school and in the youth of the church. And I was involved with the women's organization of the church
Right.
at a very young age on a national level as well as the.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm going to actually take a step back because you told me something that I didn't know, that you were in school, and high school, with Norma Eberhardt.
Yes.
Did you know her?
Yes.
Uh-huh.
She was in one of my classes. I don't remember which one it was. I don't know. I don't remember whether it was Miss Marcy's class or whether it was in the English class, which was Miss Osborne. I don't recall. It was either one of the two.
We know she went on to be a star in
Yes,
Hollywood.
and we were so excited about that. She was a down-to-earth person,
Yes.
very down-to-earth. And I remember when she was leaving school, we all said goodbye to her and everything. It was a great send-off.
Yeah, so she was going off to New York to be a model and hope to break into pictures.
Yeah.
So people took many paths from high school.
Yes.
As we all know they do, but that was a memorable one for
Yes,
you.
and Asbury Park High School had the most wonderful teachers, and the reputation from Asbury Park High School those years, young fellows that were going, and young girls too, that were going off to either to Harvard or to Yale or to Princeton
All right.
or Skidmore
Wow.
or whatever, or Vassar. You had to go to a preparatory school before you can go into these schools. But anyone graduating from Asbury Park High School, taking the classical courses,
Yes.
and they were already accepted in these Ivy League schools. They didn't have to go to a prep school first.
That's how
The
good it was.
reputation from Asbury Park High School, I'm bragging,
Yes.
It was the truth. It was the truth. The teachers were excellent teachers.
Mm-hmm.
In both the classical and the business school. They had a business school in there. They business school, the teachers were excellent. And the students that were going into business and going into college, we had a wonderful education. Really very good.
What was your best subject?
Talking.
Public speaking. You did take public speaking?
Yes, thanks to Miss Marcy.
Uh-huh.
It was public speaking, yes. It was speech course.
Yes.
And I took it, I had you had study halls,
Yes.
study periods, so I thought, well, why waste this time? I get credit. I was going to go off to school and I wanted as many credits as I could get. So I took speech and I loved it, and not knowing what I was getting into, because one of the things you had to do is answer the phone. Each classroom had a telephone, and she would, and one of the things that we had to do is when that bell rang, and she had a gadget that she rang it, and we would have to go and answer the phone, and she would tell us.
That was part of the okay.
And how were we speaking? Were we speaking correctly? You are going. Remember, you are ing. You are going. You're not going. And we had to pronounce everything. And we were marked on that. One of the things you had to do is get up there, and this was at a freshman auditorium, and you had to lead the school into the Lord's Prayer, the saluting of the flag, singing the national anthem, and you had to read a passage from the Bible. And it was non-denominational, just a passage from the Bible, and that started it. That started the program, and that's one of the things you had to do. And that I had to do that, and that first time I had to do that, I thought, oh my God!
Get up in front of everyone,
and you're looking out and you're on that stage and you feel like you're this big and this huge thing in front of you and all your classmates there.
Well, that did very well for you, that in the restaurant business, that you were able to speak with customers.
I learned a lot from being a hostess at the Criterion. That was the first thing Mr. Courageous said to me. He said, young lady, I was petrified. Young lady, he said, these are your menus. That's the front door. He says, when people come there, they've left their homes, and they're walking on the boardwalk, and they're hungry, and they're coming in here to eat. I don't care how sick you are, how well you are to hold those menus, greet them. If it's daytime, good afternoon. If it's evening, good evening. And welcome them with a big smile, and seat them. And he says, they've left their problems home. They don't want to hear your problems or our problems. They're here to eat. And so I've learned that from a very early age. And I guess you're young, you absorb all this.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
And,
but you had the personality to do it too. You had to put yourself out there and
well, not knowing when you're so young, you don't realize it. You don't realize it, that all of a sudden you're part of it. And they say, well, how'd you do? I don't know. I was there.
Years later, after Frank passed, you continued in the restaurant business.
It was
still doing that.
Yes, we worked together. It wasn't, we didn't have any money at the time. We were just struggling. But I shouldn't be struggling. I shouldn't say that. No, I take that back. When you're young, you don't realize all these things. But he would work. He would leave early in the morning, at 8 o'clock. And he would come back at 5 o'clock, 5:30. I'd have the children ready and for bed. And we couldn't afford a babysitter. And if we couldn't find one those years because the children were just a year apart. And so he would come in, I'd have the children ready, bathed and everything. And all he had to do was feed them and put them to bed. And we were talking about infants.
Yeah.
And I would go to work. This was the place opposite the Molly Pitcher, and it would be it was open from 7 o'clock in the morning until 2 o'clock in the morning. So he did the day shift, I did the night shift.
Oh my.
So I would go in, leave the house at 6 o'clock, and I would come home at 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, 2:30, 3 o'clock in the morning. And this went on There's no days off those years, you know. You were open 7 days a week. So so we had a wonderful balance there. And then growing up, of course, things changed with the different restaurants that we opened up. So.
But you had it was hands-on for you too, so over the years that you worked in it, and as I said, after Frank passed, you started managing.
We sold our just in 1965. He found a Riviera. It was called Riviera Inn at the time, and that was it was up for sale. The owners had passed on, and it was up for sale, and no one knew about it. Frank was very quiet person.
Which one? Where was this now?
The one in Bricktown.
Brick, right? Okay.
The Riviera Inn, and that was up for sale. And he did. All of a sudden, he found it. No one knew about it. No one knew that he was interested in it. And the next thing you know, the lawyer calls me up and he says, "Bess," he says, "Frank would like to show you a place." And I said, "Oh, not another one. Not another one. Not another one." He says, "You have to see it." Well, Frank took me to show me this place, and I said, "No, this is dumb." I said, "Under one condition." We had partners with all the other places.
Yeah.
And I thought, no. I said, if the only way I will sign and agree to this is if we have it ourselves, just ourselves. So that's the way it was. And so we sold our interest in all the other places. And we went into this place. And it had to.
You drive a hard bargain.
Oh, he did. Oh, yes. and it was. I did.
Yes.
I did. Yes. And that was one time that I didn't. We had such a wonderful marriage, an agreement. Not an agreement. It was just a.
It just worked.
It just worked.
Yeah,
It just worked. We could read each other's mind. We didn't even have to talk about it or anything. But we had that wonderful agreement with everything. It was a wonderful. There's no way I can explain it other than it worked. But where was I?
Well, and it was having opened the Riviera.
Anyway, so it was 1965. We sold our interest in everything and bought the place, and that was it. And unfortunately, the place was a terrible place. It was a gin mill, and that's not Frank was not a gin mill person. By this time, we had all these. We had the Butwood Manor. We had this the Sunset Cabin, and that Sunset Cabin it burned down one time while we were operating it. My brother-in-law was full of customers. It burned down, and they rebuilt a huge place, and so Frank was used to these nice places, and so.
The Sunset Cabin did have the view, though, doesn't it?
No, the Sunset Cabin didn't have the view.
Oh, where am I thinking of? One in Lakewood.
The one in Lakewood didn't have the view. You had Lake Carousel,
Yes.
but you had the highway in front of you.
Was there not a table that looked out the other way?
Route 9, you had Carousel. But and that was, I mean, Frank, he had such tremendous foresight. Because that was the only road down to, the Parkway hadn't gone down there yet.
9 was there.
And that was 9, and 9 was just a 2-lane road. And you had to go through there to get down to Atlantic City. And so anyway.
Very strategic
he found he ferreted all these places out.
Well,
Tremendous foresight. And the best part was, all of his friends would say, "Frank, we want to go into business, find us a place, find us a location, find us a location." And so there's one place, I don't know whether I had told you this before, the Howard Johnson at the Asbury Park Circle.
Yes, the Howard Johnson, yeah.
So these two friends it was Mr. Athens and his brother-in-law, and they wanted a place, so Frank found them a place. He said, "Listen, that was Howard Johnson was open before World War II, and when World War II came along, they had to close it because there was gas rationing. So it was closed, but the building was there, and it was vacant, and the lot was there, and so he said that's a good place. So, but they didn't know anything about Howard Johnson, so they said to Frank, "Well, get in touch with him and see." So they made an appointment, and the original Howard Johnson was still alive then. And they went up to New York, to Massachusetts, and spoke with him. And they wanted to, he interviewed them. And as it turned out, they said they had the cash. We didn't. We had credit rating. And they wouldn't give them the license.
Oh.
We didn't want the license. We didn't want to be in that business. But Howard Johnson said, only way is if you have the license with them. So that was the only way we could. But that was a big joke around then. We didn't have the cash. They had the cash. We had a credit rating. So that's how we got into Howard Johnson. We opened it up with Mr. and Mrs. Athens and Nick and his brother-in-law, Nick Leonardakis and his wife. And then we pulled out the first year, and they ran it from then on. So
I remember that. Was it a green roof and an orange building, or just the opposite? I remember green and orange on that circle there is Howard Johnson.
Oh, and that was then. Oh God, Asbury Park was just booming, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
It was after
I'd like
World
to
War
see
II.
Asbury boom again. It looks like it's pretty much on its way, doesn't
Yes.
it? Making tremendous strides.
Oh my goodness, yes.
Let's
Yes.
talk about the strides you took afterwards. You got very involved with the association, Restaurant Association.
But when Frank passed away, unfortunately, there was so much to do in that place. I mean, as I said, it was just a shack, and everything was falling apart. And he said to me, I said, Frank, he said, I want to show you this place. I said, Frank, it's nothing. We walked in there, and it was nothing but smoke. And that was not, and the noise.
Oh yeah, smoking was allowed in restaurants
and
then.
of course, they all quieted down. All the men that were in there. There were no women in there, but just as men.
Yeah.
And that smoke, you could cut it with a knife. And I said, Frank, please, let's get out of here. I said, I'm just as uncomfortable as they are. He said, I want to show you this place. I want to show you the potential. Now, I don't know whether you're familiar with the Riviera Inn. It's right on the river, and it's on the south side of the Manasquan River, facing the north. Well, anyway, he opens the door to go out to the porch, which was an enclosed porch. I fell through the floor. The floor was rotted.
Oh my God.
He said, I wanted to show me the potential of the place. The floor was rotted. So anyway, they all came to me. So anyway, based on his say-so, I signed the papers. So that's how we bought the place. And we were in the throes of fixing it up, just putting, getting to assembly of order in the place when he became ill. And he became ill, and within 4 years, he passed away in 71. And by that time, brick was nothing. It was nothing at all. I mean, and brick was just developing. And all the developers were there, and all the tradespeople were there. And you had the hospital up the road, right up the road, right at the blinker, at the traffic light. You made a right turn, you came into left. You made a left turn, you went into Point Pleasant Hospital. Right up the road, and the doctor's offices were all there. So, and it was a destination place, and everybody kept coming. You had all the tradespeople, you had the lawyers, the accountants, you had the street people, you had the highway people, you had everybody there, and there was no place to go to eat except us. It was that end of town.
That's right.
So, anyway, it started with something very small, and one of these pictures you'll see it, and it did develop. After he passed away, I had to take over, and it got so big, it got so busy that I had to tear the place down. It was either sell it as is, or redo it. So we closed for 6 months and tore everything down except the fireplace, and then we built around there.
You built around the fireplace.
Yes. And the only thing that remained, we kept the bar. Of course, we had to kept the bar, but right after Frank passed away, he had plans drawn. We didn't know this. We found out afterwards. We found out when he passed away that he had plans drawn and accepted by what was called then. They didn't even have. The town wasn't even formed yet with all their Board of Adjustments and planning boards and things like that. And Then you have a police department. The state troopers were the.
Gosh.
I mean, it was just at the beginning. Anyway, it turned out to be okay. Turned out to be okay.
Well, tell us how you got involved in the Restaurant Association and how you actually
Paul
scaled to
Samperi-
the type
Paul
top of that.
Samperi was.
Paul Samperi, who had a place in Ocean Township,
Yes.
down by the Asbury Circle, on the
Yes,
other side of the
yes,
circle.
okay, yes.
Yeah.
Well, he was very involved with that, and he did their publicity work,
Mm-hmm.
and he was a press agent for all of them.
Yeah.
You know, so he was a great photographer, and so he was representing the Restaurant Association, and so he came and introduced himself, and brought another member of the board with him, and the last thing I wanted was getting involved in that, but Frank always said, where you make your living, this is where you spend your time and you get involved in that.
Mhm.
So
You got
I'm
involved. Uh-huh. And was that a pretty strong association at the time? The New
When it
Jersey Restaurant?
New Jersey Restaurant Association,
Yeah.
which is part of the National Restaurant Association.
Uh-huh.
And so I was asked to join, and I did. And believe it or not, I was very quiet because I didn't know what it was all about.
Uh-huh.
I thought the only way I could learn was to be quiet and listen. And I took it all in, and then I started to voice my opinion. They were wonderful. They were really wonderful. The work that they do is unbelievable. And
Tell us about the award that you ultimately got from them. I mean, you didn't stay quiet apparently too long.
No. It was the first award I received from them was the Gold Plate Award. There's a Gold Plate and a Restaurateur of the Year.
Mm-hmm.
So the Gold Plate came first, and 2 years later, Restaurateur of the Year. And it was the first woman to receive the Restaurateur of the Year.
That's
Up
fantastic.
to that time, it was all men.
Right,
So,
right.
yeah.
And there was.
And I'm not a feminist,
No, it's
No.
quite all right. You take your rightful place.
Yes,
I'm sure that you were doing.
That's exactly it.
Yeah.
I took my place, the rightful place. Yes.
Yes.
And so I had a choice either to sell it or to fix it, and
Mhm.
that's what I did. So,
Yes.
and I'm thankful that I had that experience from a very early age, working on the beachfront,
Yes.
and then marrying Frank
Yeah.
and getting into that, and
Well, that wasn't your first award. We have here this cup, and you got that early on. So you were used to getting awards. Tell us about that cup. What
that
was
is.
it?
I represented Asbury Park High School in leadership at the Trenton State College. At that time, it was Trenton State.
Uh-huh.
Teachers, it was called Trenton State. And I represented Asbury Park High School in leadership.
Well,
So that was an honor. Yeah.
Yes, and apparently that has followed through in your life. And this was another presentation.
Well, that actually is a gift.
Uh-huh.
This is a gift. I was fortunate enough to be invited to go to Rhodesia. At that time, it was Rhodesia in Africa,
Yeah.
and now it's called Zimbabwe. But I was the house guest of a member of parliament, he and his wife. So I was their house guest. And as a memento, they gave me this.
That's
And this is Parliament Rhodesia.
That's amazing. So it's no surprise that years later you're accepting a position as the first woman restaurateur in New Jersey.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
And you also went to Washington, D.C.
Those were wonderful years. As the National Restaurant Association, once a year, the end of September, October, that time of the year, we go to Washington, D.C., and these are and you meet with your representatives, your congressmen, your senators, and you meet with them and you discuss the problems that the Restaurant Association, the restaurateurs are facing, and we try to change different laws, different rulings.
Sure.
And you meet with them, and it was a wonderful experience. You'll see these pictures here of it. It's a wonderful experience. You're working, and you see how your representatives are working or not working. I have to say that they were eye openers. That it's a shame.
You retired at age 78. So are you enjoying your retirement finally?
I was 80 when I retired.
It was 80. Oh, you hung in a few years after you intended to.
It was time. It
Yeah,
was time.
yeah.
It was time. It was time. So,
And you're enjoying your life, and that's
I'm
what you said
enjoying
you
it
wanted to do.
tremendously,
You
yes,
wanted
yeah.
to start enjoying your life.
but throughout my years, I was also involved with the church, the women's auxiliary of the church, and it's called Philoptochos. Philo is friend of the needy.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was, and you'll see those pictures too. I was invited to join that on a national level, and an international, national and a state level, and because of all the philanthropic work that I was involved with in the church and in the community, other than the church. The patriarch of the patriarch of the Eastern Orthodox Church, Greek Orthodox Church, he's in Istanbul, in Turkey.
Mm-hmm.
That's where the patriarchate is, and he invited my husband and I, and two other couples, to be his guests, and we were his guests for 3 days. Women are not allowed to stay there.
Oh, yeah.
But we stayed at the three couples stayed at the hotel, but we were his guests for 3 days.
What a wonderful honor.
It was a great honor.
Yeah.
He honored the men in his private chapel. He himself did it. The honors of bestowing the title of Archon for the men, and for the women he did this too, and each one of us separately. The title is called Archondisa.
And I know you're as proud of that as you are of anything.
I speak of that, and
Yes.
This was done in his private chapel at the Patriarchate. I get very emotional. When he invited us to go over, I was so
One of the best feelings. Yeah.
It was.
I can see it in your eyes now.
Yeah, I become very emotional with that. Yeah, especially the fact that Frank was ill at the time, and he was. I didn't know whether we should go over or not. He was just recovering, and they said, why not? If he wants to go, Dr. Schlossbach said, if he wants to go, let him go. I mean, anything happens.
I'm sure
Mark can come home.
Right.
And he says,
it's good advice.
He says,
very good advice.
He says, and there's no guarantee in this world. And so he said, so we went, and it was wonderful. It was great.
Well, what has been wonderful and great is talking to you. When you started out, we talked, and you said it was a beautiful life, and you're a beautiful person. And
thank you.
I was delighted to talk to you. I know one last thing.
I'm honored. Thank you very much.
Well, we have Marge Idelson to thank for bringing you to us.
Thank you very much.
I know the secret of your success, you had once said, was treat people like people. I refuse to accept any human being as a number. So your enthusiasm for life and for people comes through, and it's wonderful to know you, and I thank you so much for joining us.
It's my pleasure.
Okay.
Thank you. I thank you, and Marge.
It's been fun.
I thank the museum. This is really wonderful.
Okay.
I just hope I didn't talk too much.
No, you talked plenty. I wish we had more time.
Mm-hmm.
And thank you for joining us. Drop by the Ocean Township Museum, see the exhibits, and maybe tell us your story. See you next time on Hometown Histories. Okay, so we'll start, and listen, Ted does some post-production work, so don't worry.
I'm not worried about anything. Well, I am what I am. I don't know what you're going to do with me.
Oh, can I be
whatever
you?
you have to do.
I'll be you then.
That's great.
Okay. All
Okay,
right.
so just have like 5 seconds of silence here.